Good evening. The Florida Panhandle is in a state of emergency and of disbelief tonight after being hit yet again. Hurricane Dennis has come ashore, virtually retracing the powerful footprints Hurricane Ivan left behind just 10 months ago. You're looking at where the fast-moving storm stands now, affecting people living inland. The eye of Dennis closed in on Pensacola Beach, Florida, as a Category 3 hurricane with top winds of 120 miles per hour. But the impact has been felt far and wide. We begin our coverage tonight with Hoda Kotb.
These are some of the latest pictures of Hurricane Dennis lashing the Gulf Coast. Dennis's wind slammed ashore fast and ferociously, making history as the most powerful hurricane this early in the season.
Take a look at the roofing. You can see it is just hanging on.
Ripping roofs off buildings and knocking out power to homes, uprooting trees and turning roads into rivers.
Already 4.5 inches of rain and climbing.
Things began to deteriorate earlier today.
As we're reaching the afternoon hours here on Mobile Bay, conditions are really beginning to deteriorate. You can see the water is coming up very strongly here, and the winds are definitely picking up speed. Most folks in this region have hunkered down by now, and they are planning to stay inside when this hurricane hits.
NBC correspondents deployed along the Gulf of Mexico in Florida and Alabama covered the storm as it came ashore. NBC's Ron Mott was in Fort Walton Beach, Florida.
We are beginning to feel the full fury of Hurricane Dennis here in Fort Walton Beach. We are just outside the Fort Walton Beach Medical Center, one of the few hospitals in the area open during the height of this storm.
NBC's Donna Gregory was in Panama City, Florida.
Here in Panama City Beach, Florida, the main story is debris. We have watched the angry Gulf of Mexico churning along the coast, bringing with it everything from 2x4s to children's toys to entire structures. We've seen them rolling down the coastline. Now, with only spotty power outages reported, the main concern here is inland flooding in the low-lying areas. Officials say they plan to enforce a mandatory curfew tonight from 7 p.m. local time until 6 a.m. tomorrow.
NBC's Martin Savage was in Pensacola.
For the people of Pensacola, there is a double dose of maybe not good news, but at least better news. The eye of Hurricane Dennis came ashore to the east of Pensacola, sparing the community a direct hit and exposing it only to a weaker part of the storm. Then on top of that, there is also the fact that the hurricane weakened from a Category 4 to a Category 3 just before it came ashore. Still, there's damage and probably more to be found.
And while Hurricane Dennis pounded the Panhandle and Gulf Coast areas today, it was not as severe as some had feared. Still, the storm had already left much destruction in its wake. The Caribbean islands were the first to feel the wrath of Dennis, packing winds of over 100 miles an hour as it tore over Jamaica on Thursday, flooding streets and homes in the capital of Kingston. In southwestern Haiti, the growing storm flooded homes and carried away cars. Its soaking rains washed out a bridge, killing more than a dozen people who were thrown into the swollen river below. By Friday, Dennis had gathered in strength, becoming a beast the National Hurricane Center called extremely dangerous. The storm was now the strongest Atlantic hurricane in recorded history to form this early in the season and was clocking winds close to a Category 5, the most severe level. Next, Dennis headed directly for Cuba. Fidel Castro received meteorological updates in Havana as hundreds of thousands of Cubans evacuated from the devastating storm's path. At least 10 people died there. By the end of that day, Dennis had pummeled Cuba's coast with driving 145-mile-an-hour winds, tearing trees from the ground and ripping out power lines before heading for the Gulf of Mexico. Saturday afternoon, Hurricane Dennis glanced by the Florida Keys, at that point a Category 2 storm. Dennis lashed the area with sheets of rain and wind gusts as high as 74 miles per hour, knocking out power for more than 200,000 residents. The streets of Key West were littered with debris. Thankfully, no injuries were reported, but residents endured the pounding of storm surges on top of 8 inches of rain forecast. And after sweeping by the southern tip of Florida, Hurricane Dennis continued its march northwest Saturday afternoon, moving out over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, where the National Hurricane Center warned it would gain strength, taking aim at areas hit hard by last year's Hurricane Ivan.
Well, here we go again.
And while many from New Orleans to the Florida Panhandle heeded the evacuation warnings,
getting out of town,
others boarded up their homes and businesses and decided to ride it out. Even though they all remember what happened 10 months ago with a storm named Hurricane Ivan. They called it Ivan the Terrible. In September, it ripped through Pensacola, flattened buildings, left more than 50 people dead, and caused billions of dollars in damage. Now, Ivan was not kind to you last year, was he?
No, not one single bit.
83-year-old Mary Emma Potts of Fairhope, Alabama, remembers Ivan well.
It went right through the second part of the house.
Hurricane Ivan tossed a 35,000-pound oak tree right through this living room of her Bayfront home. She got out just hours before. When you came back and laid eyes on what Ivan had done to your home, what was the first thing you thought when you saw that mess?
I don't think I even had a thought. I just was, it's overwhelming to see the damage.
$100,000 worth of damage captured in these photos. Pictures that remind Mary of the nightmare named Ivan.
It looked like it was just the house was gone. It didn't look like it would be possible to bring it back to what it was.
But it did. It took 7 months to repair. She just moved back in April, and she's not sticking around to find out if Dennis is an Ivan repeat. I'm looking at your house now. I don't see a board up. I don't see any plywood. How come?
It's not going to hit.
It's not going to hit?
It's not going to hit.
How do you know?
I just feel it. I just feel it.
Mary Emma Potts made one final stop before she headed out of town today. She stopped into church with a handful of people and did the only thing that was left to do. She prayed. Late this afternoon, Mary's prayers were answered. The storm hit 100 miles east of Fairhope, Alabama. And while it did damage here, as it did in many places along the Gulf Coast, her house was spared, though it may be some time before she finds out herself. It'll be sunrise tomorrow morning before a lot of people get a first look at the damage that Hurricane Dennis has inflicted. And for some folks who are evacuated, it may actually be a couple of days before they get to come back and get their first look at their homes to see what damage has been done. Stone?
Thanks, Hoda. More on Hurricane Dennis, Al Roker, and team coverage when we come back.